The Hyksos, shepherd kings of ancient Egypt, rulers of foreign lands, Hekahasut, remain one of the greatest mysteries of the Middle Bronze Age. Asiatic invaders, who, it would seem, appeared suddenly along the Nile, and after a century vanished completely, leaving behind only the ruins of fortresses, pottery, and a few scarabs bearing Semitic names of rulers. This was the first period of foreign rule in the history of pharaonic Egypt, an unprecedented event that shook the world and changed it forever. The wars of liberation against the Hyksos gave birth to the new kingdom, the Egypt of the Thutmosids and the Ramessids. Their times, the circumstances that made their conquest possible, and even the nature of their rule are believed by many to be reflected in the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis. How much of this is true? In the historical debate on the origins of Israel, two opposing camps have emerged. The so-called biblical maximalists affirming the historicity of the biblical narratives, and the minimalists who do not recognize the Bible as any reliable historical source in the study of Middle Eastern antiquity. Indeed, there is, for example, no archaeological evidence whatsoever for the presence of Israel and the Hebrews in general in Egypt during the Bronze Age. Thus, the narratives of Genesis or Exodus may, according to the minimalists, be regarded merely as legends, as myths. Most historians today reject the historicity of Abraham or Jacob, yet we will take a look at them and their times from a somewhat different perspective, in the context of the Second Intermediate Period of Egypt. Hello everyone, my name's Irena. Welcome to my channel Ancient Sites Girl. I invite you to a podcast about the history of ancient Egypt. Today I'll tell you about the fascinating times of the Hyksos. Who were they? Where did they come from? What do we really know about the turbulent times of the 15th dynasty of Egypt? What was their connection with the biblical patriarchs? To answer these questions, we will, of course, as always, use the original ancient texts. The Hyksos remain a mystery to this day. We know very little about them. They wrote and built little, rather usurping existing monuments, and those they erected themselves likely fell victim to vengeful Egyptians after liberation from Hyksos rule. In uncovering their secrets, we must rely on the work of archaeologists and the analysis of ancient texts, often of questionable factual value. To the Hellenized Egyptian historian Manetho, who lived in the 3rd century BC, we owe our knowledge of the chronology of Egyptian rulers. He introduced the division into 30 pharaonic dynasties, as well as the very term dynasty as such. While about the Hyksos, that is, the 15th dynasty of Egypt, Manetho wrote the following. These 6 kings, their first rulers, were ever more and more eager to extirpate the Egyptian stock. Their race as a whole was called Hyksos, that is, king shepherds, for Hyk in the sacred language means king, and sos in common speech is shepherd or shepherds, hence the compound word Hyksos. Some say that they were Arabs. Manetho was mistaken in both his interpretation of the word Hyksos and most likely his identification of their ethnos, as was quoting Manetho, Flavius Josephus, this 1st century Jewish writer, identified the Hyksos with the Hebrews, a claim that later authors were quick to repeat. The Bible, however, is silent on any alleged rule of Israel over Egypt, speaking only of the bondage and subjugation of the Jews. Modern scholars have sought among the Hyksos not only Hebrews and Arabs, but also Anatolian Hittites, inhabitants of Syrian cities such as Kadesh. Most often, however, they turned toward Palestine. Some even linked them with ethnic Egyptians inhabiting the eastern Nile Delta. A particularly popular theory concerned the Hurrian origin of the Hyksos. The alleged use of war chariots by the Hyksos was meant to identify them as Indo-European Hurrians, in commerce from the north, who imposed themselves as a ruling elite over the native Mesopotamian population in the 16th century BC. Yet no one has been able to demonstrate their presence in the 17th century BC in the territory between Mesopotamia and Egypt. Their arrival in Syria and Palestine seems to have definitively taken place only after the Hyksos conquest. The presence of Hurrian warriors among the Hyksos cannot be ruled out. It's worth remembering, however, that neither historical nor archaeological evidence confirms the use of chariots in Egypt before the beginning of the New Kingdom. Alternative interpretations of the term Hyksos have included Asiatic settlers in the Delta during the 12th and 13th dynasties, the rulers of the 15th dynasty, and the peoples of Canaan in the Middle Bronze Age. It seems, however, that the term didn't refer to a people nor to a specific ethnic group, as was believed until recently, but was applied exclusively to Asiatic chieftains, princes, and kings. The term Hyksos is the Greek rendering of the Egyptian Hekahasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. This name appears for the first time during the 12th dynasty in the tomb of Khnumhotep II, nomarch of the 16th nome of Upper Egypt at Beni Hassan in Middle Egypt. The walls of the tomb are decorated with paintings showing a procession of Asiatic nomads. Their leader is labeled as Hyksos. Colorfully dressed Bedouins, identified as 37 Asiatics, ask permission to enter Egypt. We see men wearing short beards, women with long hair ending in braids. All wear characteristic tunics with an ornate zigzag pattern, lead a caravan of donkeys, and offer the nomarch a goat and a gazelle. The tomb was created during the reign of Senusret II, that is, in the 19th century BC. According to biblical scholars focusing on the chronology of the patriarchal age, it was around this time that the great biblical patriarch Abraham began his journeys to Egypt. Like the figure depicted on the walls of the tomb at Beni Hassan, Abraham was the leader of a Canaanite pastoral tribe seeking to settle in the eastern delta. As such, he too would certainly have been classified by the Egyptians as a Hyksos. The biblical history of salvation begins with him, with Abram, son of Terah, setting out with his father from Ur, an important city in the southern, lower Mesopotamia, and traveling to Haran in upper Mesopotamia. Abram, whose name got later changed to Abraham, is a man of faith. Once he came to know the one God and heard his voice, Abram set out on a 100-year journey into the unknown. God makes a covenant with him, a special agreement, a religious pact, which from then on was to be symbolized by circumcision. The conception of his son, Isaac, marks the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promises given to Abraham. Isaac is the child of promise, and the near sacrifice offered to God upon the altar. The topos of sacrificing one's own child is deeply rooted in ancient literature and culture. These terrible practices, it seems, took place throughout the Levant, particularly in Canaan and in Jerusalem itself, where in the valley of Hinnom, called Gehenna, children were sacrificed, burned upon the altar. The Moloch-type sacrifices were said to have been made here even in the Iron Age, as the Bible also confirms. Isaac, going to his own death, presents almost a Christ type, obedient to the will of his father, obedient till the very end. He himself carries up to Mount Moriah the wood that is to be used against him. All this, according to the authors of Genesis, took place at a time when Mesopotamia was still a mosaic of small Sumerian Akkadian kingdoms, often hostile toward one another and lacking any unified policy. But soon Mesopotamia would be dominated by Babylonia, for it was going to be the beginning of a very important time, the reign of Hammurabi, the famous lawgiver and king of the first Babylonian dynasty. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Middle Kingdom flourished, a time of expansion, of subjugating neighboring lands. Following their predecessors of the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs of the 12 and 13 dynasties regarded Asia, especially the Levant, as their sphere of influence, a territory they could fully exploit. Though it wasn't yet a formalized empire in the strict sense, unlike the one we will see during the New Kingdom. The pharaohs claimed authority over Phoenicia and, of course, Palestine, from where, through the land bridge of the Sinai, there was a constant influx of Asiatics into the eastern Nile Delta, the land of Goshen, as the Bible calls it. The inhabitants of the Near East were traditionally regarded as hostile to Egypt. This attitude seems to have changed in the Middle Kingdom. Semites took part in Egyptian trading expeditions as sailors and caravan leaders. They were recruited as shipbuilders, craftsmen, and soldiers. Like the Nubian Magi, Canaanites formed the garrisons of Egyptian forts. From the earliest of times, small groups of Bedouins crossed the eastern border to graze their herds in the eastern delta, lured by the proximity of better pastures and the possibility of plunder. Often these were Habiru, free semi-nomadic Canaanite tribes pushed out of arable lands, outlaw hill dwellers, whom many identified with the early Hebrews. As is well known, perhaps the most important factor driving peoples to migrate is the changing climate. Most likely, the desertification of Palestine in the 2nd millennium BC forced migrations into Egypt. Much points to this conclusion. Both Egyptian texts and archaeological evidence confirm that Semites arrived in Egypt with their flocks, particularly during periods of drought in Canaan. This is precisely the picture presented in the Bible concerning the great patriarchs of Genesis and in numerous pharaonic texts. A certain sage, Neferti, living around 1900 BC, complains of them. Quote, "All happiness has gone away. The land is cast down in trouble because of those feeders, Asiatics, who are throughout the land. Enemies have arisen in the east, Asiatics have come down to Egypt. One will build the walls of the ruler to prevent Asiatics from going down to Egypt. They beg for water in the customary manner in order to let their flocks drink." Among these newcomers were the nomads depicted in the famous tomb paintings at Beni Hassan. Among them was also Abraham and his family. Egypt becomes the stage of widely known biblical stories. Stories that often shock the modern reader. One need only recall the deceptive scheme of Abraham, who, to save his life, gives his own wife Sarah to the court of the pharaoh. That Sarah, jealous of the Egyptian slave Hagar, resentful and doubting her husband and God's promises. The deception of Jacob, stealing his father's blessing, also deserves a negative judgment. It is likewise difficult for us to accept Abraham's casting out of Ishmael to what seemed certain death. The iniquities and polygamy of the heroes are disturbing. On the other hand, they are conditioned by their life situation, their own weaknesses, and the customs of their time. God revealed His law gradually. The commandments would be received by Moses. The prophets would call for the purification of the heart and intentions, and only Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, would unveil, according to Christians, the horizons of moral perfection. We cannot demand of the patriarchs the fulfillment of an ideal presented much later. It is the grandson of Abraham, Jacob, who is regarded as the progenitor of Israel. All the tribes of Israel descend from his 12 sons, born of both wives and 2 slaves. One night, the patriarch fought with a mysterious divine messenger, and during this fight, God touched Jacob, as he later would Isaiah, Jeremiah, and other prophets, deeply, transforming his person, the sign of which is a new name. In Genesis 32 we read, "Jacob will not be set as your name anymore, but Israel, for you struggled with God and with men, and you are capable." From a philological perspective, this folk etymology of the name Israel as "he struggled with God" is unlikely, since in theophoric names containing a particle of the divine name, such as El or Yah, God is always the subject, not the object. It seems that the name, in addition to the element El, contains the noun Sar, prince, ruler, and actually means God rules, or in a wishful sense, may God rule. The book of Genesis ends with the arrival of Jacob Israel and his family in Egypt. According to biblical chronologists, their arrival falls at the beginning of the 17th century BC, that is, at the beginning of the second intermediate period of Egypt. They were brought there by famine, yet in the abundant and fertile Egypt, the numerous family of Israel grows and soon becomes a nation. So, without any doubt, his people, the children of Israel, were born precisely in pharaonic Egypt. According to the Bible, Jacob was a respected leader, not only in Canaan. After his death, he underwent a 40-day process of embalming, and in accordance with Egyptian custom, was mourned also by the Egyptians for 70 days. It's worth remembering that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are described not as fugitives or wandering ascetics, but as powerful leaders of entire tribes, a significant portion of the population for those times. Their new home, the Eastern Delta, became a true melting pot, an area inhabited by various Semitic peoples whose numbers were constantly growing. Archaeological evidence seems to suggest that the process of acculturation of the Semites of the Eastern Delta stopped, or was even reversed, already in pre-Hyksos times. The ethnic predominance that the Semites gained here restrained them from assimilating with the Egyptians, who, although still present in the Eastern Delta, were becoming a minority. Numerous excavations have uncovered the remains of settlements. Their character has nothing in common with Egyptian culture, but rather reflects northern Levantine inspirations. Temples of foreign gods were surrounded by family tombs. Burials with weapons and sheep offerings were common, as well as donkey burials placed in front of the tomb entrance. Most likely in the 18th century BC, along the Nile for the first time appeared wool sheep and horses, both species having been brought from the Levant. In the central and western delta, and of course in the Nile Valley itself, the Egyptian population still predominated, yet the erosion of central authority progressed in the north, expressed in a wave of looting of the Memphite necropolises, including the pyramids of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. These turbulent times were immortalized in the so-called Leiden Papyrus 334, containing the admonitions of Ipuwer, vividly portraying the crisis of the Second Intermediate Period. Quote, "The virtuous man goes in mourning because of what has happened in the land. The tribes of the desert have become Egyptians everywhere. Indeed, the face is pale. What the ancestors foretold has arrived at fruition. The land is full of confederates, and a man goes to plow with his shield. Indeed, the face is pale, the bowman is ready. Wrongdoing is everywhere, and there is no man of yesterday. Indeed, the plunderer everywhere, and the servant takes what he finds. Indeed, the Nile overflows, yet none plow for it. Everyone says, we do not know what will happen throughout the land. Indeed, the women are barren and none conceive. Khnum fashions men no more because of the condition of the land. Indeed, poor men have become owners of wealth, and he who couldn't make sandals for himself is now a possessor of riches. Indeed, the desert is throughout the land. The nomes are laid waste, and barbarians from abroad have come to Egypt. Indeed, men arrive, and indeed there are no Egyptians anywhere. Indeed, gold and lapis lazuli, silver and turquoise, carnelian and amethyst, epad stone are strung on the necks of maidservants. Good things are throughout the land, yet housewives say, "Oh, that we had something to eat." Indeed, noble women, their bodies are in sad plight by reason of their rags, and their hearts sing when greeting one another. Probably the last ruler of a unified Egypt, Mer-nefer-I, withdrew from the multi-ethnic north and returned to the ancestral capital, Thebes. The final pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom proved too weak to maintain their grip on the delta. Instead, the region fell under the sway of the parallel 14th dynasty, a patchwork of local rulers bearing Semitic names. Was this the beginning of the Hyksos rule over Egypt? A recently established narrative suggests that, having arisen from within, the Hyksos carried out a bloodless usurpation of power, gradually taking control of the Nile Delta. Much, however, points to a more violent event. The hypothesis of a military conquest is supported by ancient sources, including the Ptolemaic historian Manetho, who in his work Aegyptiaca wrote, "To Timaeus, in his reign, for what cause I know not, a blast of God smote us, and unexpectedly, from the regions of the east, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land. By main force they easily overpowered the rulers of the land. They then burnt our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with a cruel hostility, massacring some and leading into slavery the wives and children of others. Finally, they appointed as king one of their number, whose name was Salitis. He had his seat at Memphis, levying tribute from Upper and Lower Egypt, and always leaving garrisons behind in the most advantageous positions. Above all, he fortified the district to the east, foreseeing that the Assyrians, as they grew stronger, would one day covet and attack his kingdom. In the Said Nome, he found a city very favorably situated on the east of the Bubastite branch of the Nile, and called Avaris, after an ancient religious tradition. This place he rebuilt and fortified with massive walls, planting there a garrison of as many as 240,000 heavy-armed men to guard his frontier. Here he would come in summertime, partly to serve out rations and pay his troops, partly to train them carefully in maneuvers and so strike terror into foreign tribes. Many consider the aforementioned rulers of the land to have been the kings of the 14th dynasty. Traces of fire in their palace at Avaris indicate that the Hyksos seizure of power wasn't peaceful. Around this time, circa 1650 BC, many changes occurred. Avaris expanded several times over. A new royal palace was erected, and according to archaeologists, a new type of Levantine pottery appeared. So, Asiatic invaders took a city already ruled by Asiatics? While the remains of 14th dynasty Avaris show southern Levantine traits, the slightly later Hyksos temple types resemble, according to archaeologists, those discovered in the far north of Syria and northern Mesopotamia. Perhaps a new Amorite state in the northern Levant, or a politically strong confederation of tribes, advanced upon a weakened Egypt and, in cooperation with some Delta princes, took direct control of its north as the new 15th dynasty. Some regard it as part of a larger Hyksos empire, stretching from the Euphrates to the first cataract of the Nile. their royal cartouches have been found in Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Arabian Desert, but also in distant Crete, so they may instead reflect wide-ranging trade contacts. We know that the reign of their first ruler, Salitis, was accompanied by numerous lesser kings following their sovereign, as was practiced in Western Asia. In the complex political structure of Hyksos rule, scholars perceive traditions foreign to Egypt, namely Amorite ones. In the Levant and Mesopotamia, dependent local rulers were regarded by the great king as his sons, while they in turn addressed him as their father. Interestingly, the most famous of the Hyksos, King Apepi, called Apophis by the Greeks, according to ancient sources, addressed as my son, the ruler of Kush. Yes, also Lower Nubia, neglected by the 13th dynasty, eventually broke away from Egypt. The 13th dynasty, pushed back to its original seat, now faced hostility on two fronts. By forming alliances with the Nubians, the Hyksos encircled the still independent Thebaid with numerous fortified garrisons. Spread throughout the land, inaccessible fortresses would become a symbol of Hyksos rule. In Egyptian historical memory, that rule would be remembered as an oppressive, ruthless occupation. 100 years after the expulsion from Egypt, the famous ruler of the 18th dynasty, Hatshepsut, claimed, "I have never slept like one who neglects his duty, but I have restored what lay in ruins. I have raised up that which had been torn down ever since the time when the Asiatics were in their capital Avaris in the Northland, plundering hordes who leveled all that had been built. They ruled without the sun god Ra, and did not act according to his commands all the way up to my time, when I was placed on a Ra's throne." The times of Salitis and the beginnings of the 15th dynasty, according to biblical chronologists, fall in the time of the patriarch Joseph. He is often distinguished by the epithet the Egyptian to differentiate him from Joseph, the husband of Mary and guardian of Jesus. Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, is an important figure in the biblical history of salvation. Of Jacob, Israel's 12 sons, the book of Genesis devotes by far the most attention to him. Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, for he had been born to him in his old age and was the son of his favorite wife, Rachel. As the favored son, Joseph was hated by his brothers. They even attempted to annihilate him, but ultimately sold him into slavery to Midianite traders, telling their father he had been a victim of a wild animal. Joseph was sold into Egypt, where he became a slave of Potiphar, the commander of Pharaoh's guard. Before long, he was made steward over all his master's possessions, entrusted with respect and confidence. This prosperity resulted from the blessing of God's presence accompanying him, as the author notes in the words, "The Lord was with Joseph." When Potiphar's wife failed to seduce him, she falsely accused him of attempted assault, for which Potiphar cast him into prison. This story is interestingly elaborated in the Apocryphal, which is a part of a collection of Arabic legends from the 10th century, Akbar al-Zaman, that is, History of Time. The Hyksos are called by the medieval author Amalekites, a people known from the Bible as inhabiting the Negev desert. Zuleika, wary of rumors about her feelings for the slave, decided to show off her beautiful youth to her court ladies, and at the same time take revenge on them. Quote, Zuleika invited these women to a feast, and after they had eaten, she brought them drinks and made them sit on 2 long golden seats, arranged facing each other. These seats were covered with yellow silk and gold cloth, and above them she had stretched plain or silk curtains. The women sat on them to drink. They brought them many fruits and knives embellished with gems. Zuleika told them, "You will cut the fruit with these knives." They say that she offered them oranges. Then she ordered her stylists to prepare Joseph and bring him into the room where the women were busy drinking. The sun was just overlooking the entrance to this room. The stylists took hold of Joseph, adorned his hair with stones of all kinds, dressed him in a yellow silk robe with gold circles in the middle of which were little green patterns. They lowered his hair in bangs over his forehead to the vicinity of eyebrows. They made it fall in curls over his ears and brought its ends onto his chest, and then they put in his hand a fly swatter of gold with green feathers. Thereupon she made a sign to her stylists. They lifted up the outstretched curtain doors at the back of the room, and Joseph walked in with the fly swatter in his hand. He came into the sunlight, and his face lit up the room and all that was there. And it seemed to reflect the sunlight so brightly that the women were almost blinded. They followed him with their eyes. He stopped before them and began to cast out the flies. But they didn't realize it, for they were lowering their knives onto their hands and their fingers and cutting them instead of the fruit, without realizing it and without feeling the pain of the injury. Zuleika spoke to them, but they did not hear because of the stupefaction that fell upon them at the sight of Joseph. Joseph became renowned for his accurate interpretations of the dreams of his fellow prisoners and later, after 2 long years of imprisonment, for correctly interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh then appointed Joseph overseer of all Egypt, granting him power, honors, wealth, and an Egyptian wife. He became vizier, the second man in the world. What a striking story of success leading through suffering to glory. When, after many years, Joseph met his brothers, he passed the most difficult test of his life. He overcame within himself the sense of wrong, resentment, and desire for revenge. According to Genesis 47, the brothers stood before Pharaoh. Quote, Pharaoh asked the brothers, "What is your occupation?" "Your servants are shepherds," they replied to Pharaoh, "just as our fathers were." They also said to him, "We have come to live here for a while, because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock." Of course, they settled near Avaris, which in the time of the biblical authors was associated with the later capital of Ramses the Great, in Goshen. Quote, "So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed." This beautiful and widely known story shows above all that God cares for the righteous and can use various circumstances to achieve his salvific purpose, the fulfillment of the promise given to Abraham and repeated to Isaac and Jacob. The suffering Joseph becomes an instrument of divine action. Thanks to him, the whole family settles in Egypt, where they find salvation from poverty and famine. According to a legend recorded in the aforementioned History of Time, the vizier Joseph was buried in a stone sarcophagus placed at the bottom of the Nile, and his presence caused both banks of the river to flourish miraculously. During the Exodus, the Hebrews were said to have retrieved the coffin from the river and taken it with them into the desert. Some see in Joseph the vizier of one of the last pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom. Others, independent researchers, even identify him with Salatis himself, the first Hyksos ruler. Most Hyksos kings traditionally adopted Egyptian throne names, into which they most willingly incorporated praises of the god Ra. For example, King Apepi styled himself possessor of the strong arm of Ra, the great one whom Ra has made brave, and the great one whom Ra has made strong. Yet the Hyksos rulers remained faithful to their native cults, which they had brought with them from Asia. This is clearly attested by their West Semitic birth names, with recognizable theophoric elements. They widely worshipped Anat, well known from Ugaritic sources, the bloodthirsty consort of the Lord, Baal. Baal was the chief deity of the Hyksos, who early on identified him with the Egyptian Seth, for several reasons. Above all, Seth had been venerated in the northeastern delta long before the arrival of the Semites, and thus became the natural patron of their capital, Avaris. Like the Semitic Baal, Seth was a thundering god of the desert. From at least the time of Apepi, his cult took on henotheistic features. In the Ramessid text known as the Quarrel of Apophis and Sekenenre, we read, "He made Seth his personal lord, and served no other god in this entire land except Seth. He built a temple of fine and eternal work beside the house of Apophis, life, prosperity, health. And there he appeared every day to make daily sacrifice to Seth, while the courtiers of the palace, life, prosperity, health, carried garlands, exactly as is done in the temple of Ra-Horachti." Apepi was therefore a worshipper of Baal Seth, a new cult to which faithful Egyptians opposed the cults of Ra-Horachti and Osiris. Over time, the expulsion of the Hyksos was reinterpreted and commemorated through the lens of the primeval myth of the fight between Horus and Seth, the foundational state myth of the Egyptians. The rule of the legitimate rulers, represented by Horus, was opposed by Seth, embodying wildness and nomadism, ever more often regarded as the god of the Asiatics. The Ramessids, who would establish the 19th and 20th dynasties of the New Kingdom, came from Philae, a frontier fortress in the eastern delta, and ruled Egypt from Pi-Ramesses, a newly built capital located near Avaris, so they felt a particular loyalty toward Seth, the patron of their nome, hence the names of pharaohs such as Seti or Setnacht. Only in the late period, when the experience of foreign rule became especially painful, did the image of Seth take on a distinctly negative, even diabolical character. The 40-year reign of Apepi seems to represent the apogee of Hyksos power in Egypt and beyond. A century had passed since the conquest, and the Hyksos seemed at last to succumb to the charm of Egyptian civilization. Apepi was said to boast of his ability to read and his fluency in writing hieroglyphs, calling himself, quote, "a scribe of Ra, taught by Thoth himself, multi-talented, on the day when he reads faithfully all the difficult passages of the writings as flows the Nile. Horus, who pacifies the two lands, the good god, the son of Ra, Apepi, beloved of Seth." Although he titularly ruled over all Egypt, his actual power extended only as far as Hermopolis to the south. Anti-foreign sentiments reached their peak exactly in the south. Rebellion broke out in the old capital of the Middle Kingdom, Thebes, where the warrior 17th dynasty rose to power, replacing the ephemeral 16th dynasty, probably installed in Thebes by the Hyksos. They ruled Thebes, the city of Amun, and the war god Montu. Yet it seems that the private cult of the new royal family was a mysterious god of the moon, most likely called Ya-Tot. This is suggested by the lunar theophoric names of family members, both of the 17th and the later 18th dynasty, like Ahmose, child of the moon, or Thutmose, born of Thoth. The Thebans renounced obedience to Avaris, proclaiming a national liberation from Asiatic domination. Their mission seemed almost hopeless. The Thebaid, surrounded on all sides by Hyksos forts, functioned in a state of near-constant siege. The wounds on the mummy of the Theban king Seqenen-Retau clearly testify that he died in battle, pierced by a spear, cut by a dagger, and struck by an axe, most likely the Hyksos one. He must have lain long on the battlefield. When he reached the embalming table, his body was already in an advanced state of decomposition. His son, Kamose, continued the liberation struggle, presenting himself as an uncompromising Egyptian patriot. An incomplete stela of Kamose has been found describing his heroic struggle. Its text is fortunately preserved thanks to a copy made by a scribe on a wooden tablet. The so-called Carnarvon tablet of the 18th dynasty commemorates the defeats inflicted upon the Hyksos by Kamose, the last ruler of the 17th dynasty. Quote, "I should like to know what serves this strength of mine. One prince is in Avaris, another is in Kush, and here I sit associated with an Asiatic and a Nubian. Each man has his slice of this Egypt, dividing up the land with me. I cannot pass by him as far as Memphis, but behold, he has Hermopolis. No man can settle down, being despoiled by the imposts of the Asiatics. I will grapple with him, that I may cut open his belly. My wish is to save Egypt and to smite the Asiatics." According to the text, the courtiers of Kamose attempted to restrain the king's zeal. Quote, "Then spake the magistrates of his council. See, we are doing all right with our part of Egypt. Elephantine is strong, and the interior is with us. Their free land is cultivated for us, and our cattle graze in the delta fens, while corn is sent for our pigs. Our cattle have not been seized. He has the land of the Asiatics, we have Egypt. Only when comes one who acts against us should we act against him." They troubled His Majesty's heart. Further, Kamose describes his victorious raid against the enemy capital. Quote, "The mighty lord of Thebes, Kamose the strong, defender of Egypt, I sailed north in my might to repel the Asiatics at the command of Amun, the exact council, at the head of my valiant army, like a flame of fire, and with Magi archers at the head, watching out for the Asiatics to destroy their places. The east and the west offered their supplies, and our army was everywhere. Oh, you vile Asiatic, you who used to say, 'I am lord without equal from Hermopolis to Pi Hathor upon the Recti water.' As for Avaris on the two rivers, I laid it waste without inhabitants. I destroyed their towns and burned their homes to reddened ruin heaps forever. Because of the destruction they had wrought in the midst of Egypt, they who had allowed themselves to hear to the call of the Asiatics had forsaken Egypt, their mistress. I captured his messenger in the oasis upland, as he was going south to Kush with a written dispatch, in writing by the hand of the ruler of Avaris." The attempt at an alliance between the Hyksos and the Kushites failed. Kamose demonstrated that Hyksos territory could be penetrated with impunity. It now became clear that Hyksos' power rested solely within the high walls of Avaris, and upon those walls alone. The sudden death of Kamose brought to the throne his younger brother, Ahmose, around 1550 BC. Ahmose, called in the Delta the Prince from the South, pursued the same policy as his brother, capturing and razing Hyksos enclaves, and when Avaris finally capitulated, it too was leveled to the ground. It's not known what became of Kamudi, the last king of the 15th dynasty. Perhaps together with his army, he took refuge in the fortress of Sharuhan near Gaza. Presumably, a large part of the Asiatic population of the Eastern Delta left Egypt, along with the Hyksos forces. Many Asiatics fell into captivity. Many were forcibly conscripted into the pharaoh's army. We do not know whether the surviving Hyksos harbored any hopes of a counterattack, but Ahmose had no intention of allowing it. Specialists in Bronze Age warfare agree. Although effective on the battlefield, the Egyptians didn't cope particularly well with the siege of fortified cities. Avaris resisted them for an entire generation, and Sharuhan for as long as 3 years. Pursuing the remnants of the enemy, the Egyptians devastated Canaan. Ahmose brought under his control all territories that had been dependencies of Middle Kingdom Egypt, reconquered the empire, and established the new 18th dynasty, the first dynasty of the New Kingdom. The historical experience of the liberation wars of Thebans against the Hyksos brought about a radical change in Egyptian strategic thought. This two-generation enterprise bore no resemblance to earlier Egyptian wars, endless skirmishes with weaker enemies, occasional plundering raids into neighboring lands. The model of the New Kingdom army was transformed beyond recognition. It assumed an Asiatic character, with a leading role for horse breeding and chariot technology. 100 years after the victory over Hyksos, the successor of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, with his enormous army of thousands of chariots and the world's first true war fleet, would wage dozens of victorious campaigns, establishing a genuine, formalized empire encompassing, among others, the entire Levant and parts of Mesopotamia. After the expulsion of the Hyksos, Egyptian attitudes toward Asiatics became decidedly hostile. These sentiments seem to be reflected by the authors of the biblical book of Exodus. The descendants of Israel, the Israelites, after several hundred years in the land of the pharaohs, had become a nation, strong and numerous, rapidly increasing thanks to God's blessing. The change of king described in Exodus 1 points to a new reality. A new pharaoh claimed, quote, "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Whether the Israelites were indeed numerous people in Egypt remains a matter of doubt. In the numerous Egyptian documents from the New Kingdom, there are no mentions whatsoever of the Israelites' presence there. The number of 600,000 men mentioned twice in the Torah would mean that, counting women, children, and the elderly, between 2.5 to 3 million people left Egypt. Nowhere do we find traces of such a great migration, neither in Egypt, nor in Sinai, nor even in Canaan. Egyptian sources do confirm, however, that the new kingdom imposed forced labor on thousands of foreigners, especially prisoners of war. Some of them are depicted, among others, in the famous tomb paintings of Rekhmire, vizier of Thutmose III. Egyptian overseers are shown with sticks, supervising foreign workers producing mud bricks, who carry them in yokes on their shoulders to a nearby temple construction site. The accompanying text identifies these workers as having been brought from military campaigns in Canaan, Syria, and Nubia. Given the hostile attitude of the Egyptians toward Asiatics at that time, the enslavement of the Hebrews could have taken place. Of course, no inscription has ever been found stating bricks made by Hebrew slaves. Thus, according to biblical minimalists, the Hebrews were never there. And the story of the departure from Egypt and the journey to Canaan was written in the 6th century BC during the Babylonian captivity for the displaced population, primarily to construct a theology of return to the promised land, so that the exiles would neither fear nor hesitate to return. In this sense, the Exodus, that is, the triumphant departure of the Israelites from Egypt, becomes merely a myth, a theological construct. The Bible, of course, is a theological source, but also a historical one, though not always in a direct sense. It tells us a great story, a history of salvation that took place in Egypt. After a long period of silence, God looked upon the pleas of the people of Abraham and called Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt. After speaking with God at the burning bush, Moses is to go to Pharaoh and demand the release of his people. If Pharaoh doesn't comply, a wave of disasters, known as the plagues, will fall upon Egypt. The departure of Israel from Egypt and their wanderings in the wilderness is a fascinating subject for another podcast. Well, I hope I have brought you a little closer to the history of the mysterious Hyksos, without whom understanding the New Kingdom and the later periods of Egypt seems impossible. Thank you for listening. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to hear about next time. I would also like to thank all my patrons. I truly appreciate your contribution. If you don't support me yet but would like to, I placed my Patreon link below in the description. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, and see you on the next one.